So, my goodness, it's only 90-something degrees after lunch, just the way I like an audience. Nice and sleepy, so I'm hoping that this discussion of research integrity will wake us all up a bit. There's certainly a lot to be focused on, and some opportunities and risks, or shall I say, Judy might say, everything's an opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening with research integrity. And first, just a little bit more about me. Thanks for the introduction, Tracy. I just celebrated 25 years at Elsevier. I'm based in New York. Oh, thank you. Thank you. It says a lot about Elsevier that I've been there quite a long time, and I've had a lot of different roles in that time, which are essentially my street cred for talking to you about research integrity. Previously, I was a publishing director for our computer science and engineering journals list. I also worked in the early days of Science Direct product development. And I am super pleased to be together with the Digital Commons community today. Already, I have learned so much. And I want to thank the Digital Commons team and Saad and Pramita and Tracy and everyone and Lauren. I'm leaving people out, but it's been such a great event already. And I'm really touched, particularly by the recent panel that talked about how integrated Digital Commons is becoming at the institutional level. It's a great, great story to tell, and the narratives and highlights that you're bringing are fantastic. So, research integrity is the focus of my talk today, and I'd like to take a step back and look at some of the drivers of the rapid change in scholarly communication in the academy, some of which are contributing to this rise of misinformation and pose risks to this, this sacred scientific record. And I'd like to then end my talk by sharing some of the specific ways we at Elsevier, and by extension Digital Commons, how we're trying to mitigate these and find ways forward. So first, let's look at some of these drivers and what has been changing in scholarly communication to pose threats to research integrity. And some of the information that I'm going to share with you come from a report that was already mentioned earlier today, the second digital transformation of scholarly publishing. And I don't know if Roger's here, but Roger, you got one mention. This is going to be a second mention for the Ithaca report because we're all reading it and using it. And also STM Trends 2028. How many of you know what the STM organization is? Interesting. So Elsevier is a member of STM, and it's an association of more than 140 publishers that work together to cross-collaborate on issues related to digital transformation and also policy. And these two reports certainly aren't the only sources of this driver information, but it shows you that the wider community is thinking about these things. And the four areas that I want to touch base on briefly are growth, and that means growth in publication output. Also service, a proliferation of services across the industry. Changing modalities of access, and then of course new technology. All of this coming together is like a perfect storm for research integrity. So let's talk about growth, and I'm hoping you can see this chart. It comes from STM, but we're seeing over the last 10 years, on average, 4% compound average growth for the number of articles produced. But there's also a pronounced jump in the number of reviews and conference papers, which grew by 47%. And gold OA publications had a CAGR of 18% over the period, and subscription only is hanging there at flat or about 1%. It's a lot of growth. It's a lot of growth to manage and monitor and put through the peer review process. And here's how that looks at Elsevier. In 2023, Elsevier received almost 3 million submissions, and we published over 630,000 new research articles following peer review. And our publications and data represent more than 2,900 journals, I think Judy already mentioned that, developed in collaboration with 33,000 editors and over 1.5 million reviewers worldwide. And the global scientific community accessed these articles over 2 billion times across our journal platform. And in this environment, maintaining integrity is key. Elsevier journals accounted for about 17% of the world's literature, but they were cited 28% of the time. And we have a huge commitment to this quality, and maintaining it requires vigilance, and it requires resources, and the growth in content is rapidly outpacing the human capabilities for synthesis and review, which can have implications for research integrity. So what are we doing about it? Lots, but let me go through the drivers again. The second driver is service provision and shared infrastructure. We're looking at a world where persistent identifiers have evolved over the last 10 years and continue to evolve. We're looking obviously at data repositories, preprint servers, and shared infrastructures create great opportunity and great efficiency. But this multiplicity of platforms, and ironically, their ease of use, also creates potential for corruption of the scholarly record and also use by other services, including AI providers like Perplexity is a new one, Meta, and also ChatGPT. We need to be mindful of how this content is mined, and we need to be mindful of how it's being used. So into our perfect storm come new business models, right? And there are many of them. We have gold, green, bronze, and also diamond OA. And it's a very nuanced landscape right now, and I am thrilled that Digital Commons actually represents open source publications because it is definitely a great contributor to global equity, but it also creates opportunities for predatory publishers, and that was already mentioned here today. So I think research integrity is on our minds. And last but not least, we come to probably the most important driver, which is LLMs and Gen AI. And this is truly transformational. When I joined Elsevier back in the day, I've already said it's 25 years, so I'm not embarrassing myself, but it was the great print to electronic migration. Everything was print, and we were digitizing it, and we felt great. And then there was I would say, a bit of a plateau as other providers came online, new services came into play. Not since then have I really felt that things have been so transformative. But with that said, Elsevier has been using machine learning and extractive AI for years. And we were just at lunch side, and you were saying, oh, I've been doing this. People don't understand necessarily the nuances. It's been in play for a very long time. But it's something that continues to evolve. And I'm getting asked to speak about it a lot. I'll just flash back to last November. It was about a year ago. And I got a call from the Council of Research Officers at the APLU, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And they said to me, Anne, we need to understand what Elsevier is doing with AI. Can you and Springer come and talk to us about that? And that was interesting because they were asking for like a small cohort of commercial publishers. And so once we made sure with our legal team that it wasn't antitrust, we got together and told APLU what we were doing. But the questions that I were getting from those research officers, it really struck me. It wasn't necessarily AI that they were talking about. They were asking about services that had been in play for a long time and ways in which you probably know in this room as library stakeholders, but they didn't know about. So it was an opportunity to educate and talk about how Gen AI is informing our products, whether it's through Science Direct or HESI, our Higher Education Learning Center for Health, which monitors student behaviors, or rather encourages student behaviors and positive outcomes, and understanding complex patterns in the scientific content with SciVal. Our technology approach is to take lots of content, the journals and books that I mentioned, but also patents, policy documents, clinical trials data. This, again, won't come any surprise to you who are running repositories that have all kinds of different content that you're trying to synthesize and put out, but this actually informs our product suite. And why I'm sharing just these 2 slides on AI with you is because this also informs the work that we are doing to mitigate research integrity. And I'm going to share, because I'm almost honor-bound to our leadership, to share Elsevier's responsible AI principles. It's important enough that I think I should read it out loud. We consider the real-world impact of our solutions on our people. We take action to prevent the creation or reinforcement of unfair bias. We can explain how our solutions work. Over to you, Saad. We create accountability through human oversight, and we respect privacy and champion robust data governance. Really, really important, and we live those principles every day. So now that we understand a little bit more about the drivers, I wanted to talk about the rise of misinformation and the risks to research integrity. There we go. This slide comes from Retraction Watch, and it shows you the number of retractions by year, by country. And in the last 10 years, you can see the spike, and with notable spikes to nearly 8,000 articles in 2023. Last year, Elsevier retracted 856 articles, and we anticipate that there will be many more simply because of the proliferation. It requires a lot of vigilance and a lot of technical and human teamwork to manage that. In 10 years ago, we had one, two, three people working on research integrity issues. This year, we have 39, a team of 39 in our research and data integrity department. We anticipate that that will be close to 80 by year end. So we have 80 staff working on research integrity related issues and the technology that is required to mitigate some of these. There are complex networks of individuals and organizations that are driving a lot of systematic manipulation of the scholarly record, and these ethics cases are also becoming more complex. It's not a one and done retraction usually. There's a lot of networks that can be uncovered, and this creates challenges. And this is very public information, and it creates problems for all of us. So these are just some recent headlines that I thought I would grab. So you can see on Retraction Watch, there's a citation of Elsevier itself. An Elsevier paper written by ChatGPT goes viral. And then there was another article in Nature, the latest crisis in research literature, overrun with ChatGPT and LLM-generated articles. And then finally, the icing on the cake, the Daily Mail. Who here has ever read the Daily Mail or will admit to it? I see one hand. Okay, the guilty pleasure of the Daily Mail. The AI scandal rocks academia as nearly 200 studies are found to have been partly generated by ChatGPT. So when the Daily Mail takes a break from covering Britney Spears and Kim Kardashian, they're covering scientific publishers. And this is what the public sees. So we really need to be honor-bound to create some mitigation strategies in order to support the research integrity of the scholars that we're working to highlight and support. So Gen AI is an opportunity for researchers, but also potentially for bad actors too. So you get into a situation where it's a little bit AI versus AI. And now that I've talked a bit about the size of the problem, let me talk about what it looks like. We've observed authors not declaring use of AI to improve their writing, which fosters suspicion. We also see the presentation of hallucinated references and nonsensical image generation. And we've seen reviewers breaching confidentiality by uploading papers into AI systems, which is definitely a breach of our policies. The threats to research integrity and unethical behavior, these are deliberate and hidden. When we start digging into cases, we see a lot of misconduct, including fabricating and manipulating data and using tools to disguise plagiarism, actually disguise the plagiarism that they're using, and also impersonating other individuals. There was a case of identity that we were talking about just before the break, and we see that a lot. We also see changing authors during the editorial process without informing the editor. One of the most clever forms of fraud I ever saw was back when I was a publishing director, even before Gen AI, where we had a paper that went through peer review, and the paper goes through, and the editor said, well, with some minor changes, it will move on to publication. Please make the minor changes and resubmit. So the authors made the minor changes and resubmitted, and then added 4 pages of citations to their own articles, which was not picked up on the second round of review because they never went back to check the bibliography. Now that we have AI tools and better tools to detect this, that would not have been the case. So these are just a few of the ways in which we see challenges to research integrity manifesting itself. Finally, I wanted to talk about the future, which is really built on trust and mitigation and ways forward. So how are publishers upholding research integrity and publishing ethics? We already talked about the development of that workforce and what it means at Elsevier and the 80 people that we are having working on these issues. Its solutions are also related to technology and data and how we can use tools to better detect what's going on in the systems. It's also about collaboration. This event itself, us coming together, is a collaborative event to discuss how we can improve research integrity. And finally, implementation of policies and best practices. So I've talked about the workforce. Just looking at technology, we've identified 5 areas where we think research integrity crops up and where it matters. There's person integrity, content and author integrity, editorial integrity, review integrity, and also reference integrity. And we're working to solve these issues both pre-publication and post-publication. And we are raising things like authorship change flags. I mentioned it's very suspicious when an authorship changes. We have initiated a confidence check project that is entering into a scaled pilot phase. And on the special issues front, a review of our vetting processes for proposals and best editors is now complete. And this prevents a lot of conflict of interest issues, which can also create risks to the scholarly record. We're looking at signals that come through the literature, paper signals like problematic phrases, editorial process signals that identify those simultaneous submissions, and also the guest editor issues that I mentioned. Finally, collaboration. Research integrity and publishing ethics is a shared responsibility, and we actually work with not only institutions, but also wider organizations like STM that I mentioned previously, like the STM Integrity Hub. We also work with an organization called United to Act, which is more than 40 organizations coming together to have discussions about research integrity. And we're part of a working group on interactions between institutions and journals when allegations of falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism arise. We're also a member of something called the CREC Working Group, which is the communication of retractions, removals, and expressions of concern. And so we all work together to try to arrive at solutions. Policy is the last front on which we really work to mitigate, and that includes our policies for authors. And I'll just read a few of them out, and I'm sure you're well acquainted with this as part of what happens at Digital Commons. But our authors only are allowed to use generative AI to improve readability and language. They have to apply human oversight. Most importantly, ChatGPT cannot be an author, despite the fact that in the early days of ChatGPT, it had an ORCID ID before we knew it. So editors and reviewers, as I mentioned before, they can't upload their manuscript. It's a breach of confidentiality of research into an LLM. They can't upload peer review reports. We prohibit that, again, in deference to confidentiality of the research. And AI shouldn't be used to assist in the review, evaluation, or the decision-making process. And I want to say at this stage, because the forces are marching forward, and these policies have to be agile. They have to adapt. And we also have to recognize that research culture varies by geography. So certain policies might play well here in the US, but they might not work as well or be as well understood in the rest of the world. And finally, we prevent ChatGPT from being used to manipulate figures, images, and artwork with rare exceptions. So how can library publishers uphold research integrity? You are all very closely involved too and have the same macro trends facing you of growth, service provision, access models, and technology. And the same 4 opportunities hold true for Diamond, for Green, for any type of publication. And we really need to look at the workforce and the support we're giving you, the technology and data that can be used to mitigate, collaboration opportunities, and best policies and principles. I was talking to a few of you here before the break, and many of you see the issue of research integrity in IRs as I think, Roger, you said it's an opportunity for a conversation. Is that right? You know, with the students on your campus. And I think that's true. Elsevier has free resources through Researcher Academy to help ECRs navigate through this. If you haven't seen them, I encourage you to look. I'm happy to guide you to the Research Academy. Lots and lots of modules that can help your ECRs, but also even senior faculty. And DC supports through their consulting services team and also sharing best practices and examples. And the journals support alignment with publishing standards and DOIs. And for the premier journals, there's a similarity check and a duplication check. I'm sure you're all very well aware, but DC and Elsevier are very, very committed to making this work for all of us. So I'm not even sure where I am on time, but I was hoping to have a little bit of interaction with this group. When I was presenting on this at the University of South Alabama earlier this year, Sheila Garrity, who is the Director of Research Integrity for the U.S. Health and Human Services, presented, and she made it incredibly interactive with her audience, asking some of the challenges that they faced, and I'd like to do the same. And to provoke us into, having this kind of conversation, I'd just like to share some thoughts. Judy, I'm not ending with a quote like yours, but some food for thought here, which include, let's see, which is my favorite. I think the first one, the article will differ from what we mostly see today in that it will be integrated into a broad suite of services from discovery to analytics, as the act of publication will be the equivalent of plugging into a network and the principal audience will be machines. So faced with that reality, how do we navigate forward and how do we navigate forward together? And with that, I'll pause and take some questions, but also ask you some. Yes, I see a question or a comment.
So we have been we developed AI policy for Kean University, and over the few months, and we also got Grammarly subscription, and a lot of faculty are using it. While they were using it, and they sent their manuscript or sometimes to publishers, and it came back as 30%, 40% AI written. But they didn't write it. They just corrected it using Grammarly. So how are we working with that, and how are we making sure, we are making sure on our side that they're doing the right thing, they're following the policies set up by us, they're just using Grammarly to either fix the grammar or just change a couple of things. So how are we managing it all on the publisher side?
So on the publisher side, you can upload for grammar post peer review, right? But not before. Or if they use it, they need to disclose in their document, and that is fine, right? The reviewers themselves can't upload it. Do you know what I mean? If the author chooses to and discloses it to you, then that's fine. But once it hits the peer review stage, a peer reviewer can't upload it into the system. Oh. Thanks, Theo.
Yeah, so I was going to say, none of those tools actually work. So it's an unsolved problem to identify how do you identify something's AI generated. And to be honest, it probably won't be solved because the technology is getting better fast enough that there's no markers anymore. So it's an active area of research. Can you watermark it in some way and so on? But the early signs are not promising. And so a lot of people are selling this as, check student work or check this work and so on. But honestly, none of them really work. That's the reality of the technology at the moment. Yeah. That is, I can just tell you the reality. It's a tough question. The answer depends on what is the use case you're doing, right? So if it's for integrity here, it's a combination, as Anne talked about policies, human checks, cultural standards to some extent, and so on, which are a whole range of things you're trying to do. There's no silver bullet answer to this question. If it's student work and so on, then honestly, and I'm just speaking personal opinion here, you have to accept the reality the tools exist and will be used. And you have to think about how do you change the way work is assessed or the nature of assignments, what are you doing and so on, to recognize that reality. Because the alternative is that you're going to have a foolproof way to identify when they do it and you're going to stop them. Just honesty is not going to happen. Right?
Thank you so much.
Can I ask the audience a question? Who would like to take on the question, what is the institutional repository relationship to research integrity? How do you feel it plays into the discussion on your campuses? I see a hand. I see a lot of fans waving. I don't know, actually.
You got
I
a
don't
brave
actually
one.
if hands are up or you're just so hot.
I'm relatively new to the IR position in my institution, and it keeps me up at night because we do ETDs, we have a few journals, and I feel like my job is to keep the journal editors abreast, and I feel like at this point I'm going to have to meet with them every year, and maybe even twice a year to say these are the new things that are coming down the pike. So our current journal editors, I want to say, do you have an AI policy? Because we have an AI policy, but then we have to redo our publishing agreement with the journals, and so it keeps me up at night. And with the ETDs, when it's school-wide, so depending upon who the dissertation mentor is and who the department chair is and who the dean is, like, how do we distribute that responsibility? It makes me very nervous.
I can imagine, and we could definitely support through Researcher Academy and, of course, the Digital Commons consultants. I wonder if some of those editors of your journals don't also serve as editors on other journals, because that's a major conduit of information. And Elsevier publishes on behalf of a lot of the major society journals who actually also sometimes have problems scaling these policies and understanding, even among the disciplinary specific communities. So there's an opportunity for, I think, knowledge transfer. And I think there's also even an interdisciplinary opportunity on campus sometimes to bring people together. A lot of times when we go on a campus and do an editors meeting of all Elsevier editors, those editors won't know each other even though they work on the same campus. And they have these wonderful synergistic conversations about best practices across journals and disciplines. And so could be an opportunity, and we're always happy to come and talk about it. Other relationships of the IR to research integrity. I see a hand.
One of the things that I do, and I'll be talking more about this later, is I upload the posters from an annual student research day. And I do try and look at them, and certainly I make sure that there are no issues with copyright or HIPAA. But beyond that, I can't really be aside from the fact that most of them or many of them are not well-made posters, that's a separate issue.
We need a poster template.
They have one, and they still, but that's another subject altogether. But sometimes I am a little concerned about, the quality of the research that goes into the posters, and but I don't know how to get around that.
I think it's about building a culture, right? A culture of education and trust, essentially, and best practices around that. And believe me, I've been to many college campuses and seen a lot of really crappy posters. So you're not alone, which is another theme of Elsevier. I'm getting the wrap-up sign, and I'm going to step away before I get the cane. But you've been, really wonderful to meet today, and I hope to continue our conversation off stage. Bye for now.